Lesson number 3, aquatic food habitat in the spring. As mentioned in the last lesson, I'm going to present aquatic food habitat by the season since there is so much material to cover. We'll start out with spring, which will be considered the months of March, April, and May. Uh, Both aquatic food and trout are ruled by temperature. For large and small lakes, the temperature of the season dictates where the fish and aquatic food will live. Not all lakes contain all types of aquatic food. Food that has established itself and will continue and may grow as a result of hatches year after year. In that way, a lake actually gets a personality based on the aquatic food chain that lives there. Season determines activity. The best way to understand the interaction between the trout and the aquatic food is to look at the yearly cycle by seasons, since they're closely related to the temperature changes that promote activity in any lake. Lake elements and structures help to determine the location of aquatic food and trout. At 34.2 degrees, turnover takes place in 24 hours, where the warm water on the bottom moves toward the top and the cold water on the top moves toward the bottom. We talked about this with a presentation in lesson number 1. At 47 degrees, trout or insect activity begins, and the trout will begin to be more aware of their presence. A trout's metabolism will start to get higher now when he begins to eat more and to move more. This usually happens around late March. Most insects are available then. Trout begin to cruise as the temperature starts to warm and the activity in the lake becomes more apparent. Before the temperature of the lake becomes high enough to produce large numbers of aquatic food, the only food available to trout is zooplankton, damselflies, alderflies, leeches, and scuds. As discussed in lesson number 2, if you have not documented the lake elements, especially weed types, you should collect samples to determine where the aquatic food will be in the lakes that you fish. Here are examples of weeds and the insects that live in them. Scuds can be found in the variety marked for all insects. Here are examples of other weeds that insects live in. The insects that live and eat in all these types of weeds actually slowly take on the color of the weed they eat. This camouflages them from feeding trout. When you combine the information on the internet to determine which insects are available by order they are eaten by trout, this is what the chart would look like. When we talk about aquatic food, I have no special fly patterns that I use. I look for the patterns that I want to use on the internet and tie them based on the videos that I find there. This chart is considered the average for trout in spring. And based on lakes, but based on the lakes that I fish, the activity of the food that's in it, I would place this chart in a different order. This is the order that I would use for the lakes that I fish. I have purposely set chironomids at number 1, but in the 15 years that I've fished in lakes in Oregon, I've never seen the numbers of chironomids or the size of the chironomids to influence trout feeding much. I've taken stomach samples that have shown very few chironomids in the stomach at one time, and if they are there, they're usually smaller than a size 20 hook. But chironomid hatches do attract leeches. I consider leeches number 2. They're found moving close to the bottom to find food. They live around debris, decayed debris, like logs or leaf debris, or just plain bottom debris. They have eyes, but they don't see images. They just see light movement. They have excellent hearing and can determine the size of prey by detecting the vibrations of their movements in the water. Now, since chironomids can be one of the first active insects in the lake in spring, leeches will actually key on their location when they are in position about 1 or 2 feet above the bottom as they prepare to hatch. Leeches like cover of darkness and low light, so they move a lot in the spring because of overcast days and rainy skies. In the lake, any larva or pupa or nymphs that are moving are all available food sources to them. Another key about chironomid activity, you'll see swallows flying around the lake, and when the swallows dive down toward the water, they're actually picking up midges. This is where you should fish your leech. I use a mini leech, the hook size 10 4X. Black is the killer color in spring, and it seems to outfish other colors till the weather warms up. Zooplankton is number 3. As mentioned before, zooplankton is available throughout the entire lake in large quantities in the spring. Trout can rely on the staple until they begin to see or feel or hear other activity that coming to life within the lake. One spring I actually fished the inlets of a 600-acre lake where the trout were over 20 inches, and their stomach samples were full of only zooplankton. Scuds are listed number 4 because of their availability over other insects that are not available in the early spring. They are active even before the temperature will allow other aquatic food to begin to move in the lake. Scuds can live in water up to 25 feet deep, but they actually prefer water that's shallower. They feed around weed beds. They're active from February to October. Some will move to shore to hide under rocks, and they will make the trip several times during the day, especially if it's a bright and sunny day. Trout will actually look for them to be on the move in this pattern. Scuds prefer low light, and they will stay out of the sun, preferring to feed in shallows or even in deep water. Damselflies are ranked number 5 in the spring, and I'll bet you're surprised to see that. But there is a 24-month variety that is semi-dormant through winter and appears again in the spring. They have a feeding pattern that makes them available to trout in the spring, and we'll talk more about that later. There is another damsel that has a regular 12-month cycle. This variety is green in the late spring when they're juveniles and brown about 2 months later when they're fully grown nymphs. Juveniles are usually a size 12 hook, and the full-grown nymphs are actually a size 10. When they swim, they prefer to swim about 2 or 3 feet below the surface, and usually they'll swim in a straight line, and they prefer to swim when the sun is shining. Now on this site there's a video called the 24-month damselfly. It shows the feeding pattern that the 24-month damselfly uses in the spring and how the trout take advantage of that. Caddis flies are ranked number 6 because of the size of the insect available in spring. You see on this chart that there are 12 varieties that are available, and 6 of them are tied on a size 8 hook. Caddis flies are available as larvae or pupae, emergers, or even adults, and live in water up to 25 feet deep. They prefer water at 10 feet or less. They move anytime, during the day, and in any weather. They prefer to live and feed around rocks, weed beds, and leaf debris. As you can see by the chart, 7 types of larvae live and move in cases, marked larva C on the chart, until they become pupa. Trout will eat them case and all, but they prefer not to. Another 6 larvae, marked larva F on the chart, usually leave their cases and free float 2 feet above the bottom from a distance of 20 feet to 200 feet during the daylight hours. They do this to find new feeding areas and to actually build new cases. They drift with the current until they find a suitable place and will do this several times during daylight hours in their larva stage. Caddis will either eat insects or leaves or algae, and some will eat all 3. The chart shows their food preference by type and at what stage they would be. So depending on the type, they can be found close to weed beds or in bottom debris. As pupa, the caddis will suspend itself about 2 feet above the bottom, just like chironomids. They may stay in this position for several days before they head to the surface to emerge. As a food source, two varieties are available in March and April, with all 10 being available in May. Alderflies are ranked number 7 because there are two varieties, types of insects available in spring. They have a 9-month life cycle with both the larva and adult can be available at the same time. They appear in mid to late May when the days are sunny and windy. They're more active in the morning to midday. Larva is found along the shoreline where alder trees have dropped their leaves, and adults are available when the leaves begin to form on the trees or when other vegetation matures near to or overhanging the shoreline. They will climb into the leaves to mate and deposit their eggs. They are very clumsy and almost always end up in the lake. Alderfly larva has a hook size average of size 10, 1x in length, but they will grow to a 3x in length. They are more or less dark brown or cream colored. The larva is more or less cigar shaped with the head as broad as the thorax. A brown or a tan or cream colored Calabatus nymph can be used to imitate the larva. The adult alderfly averages a hook size of about 3x size 10. Its overall color is black or dark brown. The tide pattern looks like a black ant, except the wings are made from anti-static bag material. The fly is slightly weighted at the hook so that it will fall vertical into the water, just like the actual bug will do. Mayflies are ranked number 8. This chart shows you the color, the hook size, and the name of the flies that are used as imitations. Nymphs can be found in water up to 25 feet deep, but prefer water between 5 and 10 feet deep. They're most active on cloudy days in the spring between 12 noon and 2 p.m. Later, they're available between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. They move in and around certain weed beds to feed on them. Later in the year, they begin a false ascent in movement toward the surface and falling back down into the weeds. They practice this move many times until they finally make the surface to emerge and complete their life cycle. They can hatch 3 generations per year, one in the spring and one in the summer and one in the fall. The most common is the Calabatus nymph, which is tan or gray in color and is mostly active when they move. In fact, they are so well camouflaged that the trout can actually uh, capture them until they see them move. They range in hook size from size 14 to 10 and are larger in the spring and smaller as the year goes by. Just before they hatch, their wing case turns black and their middle tail is actually clear. Since dragonflies have a 4-year life cycle, they're ranked number 9. Nymphs can be found along shorelines in deep water in late spring. Their underwater activity make them difficult to imitate with a fly, and most people just catch them with a woolly bugger that's being pulled close to the bottom. Aquatic insects have exoskeletons. That means the outside of their body acts as the skeleton for the insect. As they feed, they grow, and they shed their exoskeleton and emerge a little larger from it. They must remain still and secure in weed beds and other covered locations so that they can wait for their exoskeleton to form its hard shell after they've left their old shell. Then they can move and feed again. In this stage, they're actually a bright green. Though I've never seen much information about anyone using flies that imitate the Instar stage of aquatic insects, I'm going to tie a few patterns and see if it can be successful. My idea is that if the aquatic insect becomes dislodged from the outer before its outer shell is hardened, it would be easy pickings for a trout as it drifts helpless in the lake's current. I would imitate only the damselfly and dragonfly since their nymph sizes are so large. The damselfly nymph has approximately 10 to 12 instar stages. That means in the second month of their life cycle, they are growing and changing color a lot. The dragonfly nymph has approximately 15 instar stages over a 4-year period. This could mean that the last year of their cycle that they too would be changing color a lot as they grow to mature and emerge.